All right, welcome back. So, here are a few thoughts from John Gottman. Communication may not resolve conflicts that arise due to a negative or poor perception or the poor perception you have or you hold of your spouse. There's something we call the law of attribution in psychology. The law of attribution. What does that mean? It means that if I make a mistake or if I do something wrong, I didn't mean it. I didn't intend it. It was just a mistake. I just was having a bad day. But if it was your spouse that made that mistake, that my spouse has a character problem. My spouse is always annoying me. My spouse is not always seeking my best interest. So the law of attribution is that bias in your brain that says to you that anytime you do not do the right thing or you make a mistake, it was just a mistake. You didn't intend it. But anytime your spouse makes a mistake, it is about their character. That's what we call the law of attribution. So John Gottman is saying if you already have a negative or a poor impression of your spouse, it does not matter what your spouse does or what your spouse does not do. You will always seek for ways to nail your spouse. So if you're in a marriage where there is nothing you do that is okay for your spouse, there is nothing you do. If you do this, your spouse will complain. If you do that, your spouse will complain. If you don't do this, your spouse will complain. If you don't do that, your spouse will complain. It is likely that your spouse does not see you from a very good place. That's why. That's why it does not matter what you do. You will always be blamed. And some of you are like that. It does not matter how well your spouse tries. It's just one fly. Because you always attribute all their errors or mistakes to their character. So John Gottman is saying the only way to resolve that is not to keep talking about it. It's not to keep calling for a meeting. It's not to keep asking for therapy. It's not to always, let's talk about it. Because talking will never solve that problem. The only thing that will solve that problem is for you to sit down and begin to adjust the impression you have of your spouse in your brain. That's the only thing. You need to change that impression. You need to tell yourself that my spouse is not perfect, but my spouse is a good person. Have that conversation with yourself. It's very important. So it's possible that a lot of unresolved issues in your marriage is traceable to the fact that it is difficult or impossible for you to see your spouse as a good person. Your spouse is so familiar with you, or you are so familiar with your spouse such that you don't see your spouse as a good person. You just believe that he or she is just a bad person. They are good to everybody else, but they are a bad person to me. So it doesn't matter how hard your spouse tries. You are in a position you've taken a position of judgment, of criticism, right? And another way you know is that anytime your spouse brings up something that he or she is not happy with, you are very defensive. You are always quick to say, so your spouse is saying, I'm not happy with blah, blah, blah. I say, how about, do you think I am happy with blah, blah, blah? Your spouse is sharing with you something that is important to him or her. You are already ready. You are ready with, well, this is what you also do to me. You are always very defensive. That is a key, that is a clue to letting you know that you need to decongest. You are not seeing your spouse in a good light. So it doesn't matter what your spouse does. Your spouse will always be wrong. And you know something, if you don't do the work, let me tell you what happens. The devil can see clearly that you don't respect your spouse. The devil can see clearly that you will never give your spouse a chance. The devil can see. So what the devil does is to leverage on that existing problem to build this castle. You won't stand a chance. You won't stand a chance. Right? That's what John Gottman said. Right. So what did God? So in follow up to that, John Gottman said, and I have to write it down so that I'll read it to you. Develop a more positive outlook towards your spouse. Develop it. That is an internal work. You don't need your spouse to cooperate with you for you to do this. This one is work you do by yourself. You sit down and you start reminding yourself that your spouse is a good person. Your spouse may not have gotten everything right. He or she may not have made you happy, but your spouse is a good person. And from my study, I also realized that many people have good spouses. Your husband is a good person, your wife is a good person, but the devil has succeeded in blindfolding you so much that you can't see the good anymore. And you know what? That is what he has to do to finish your marriage. All right? So for you to believe or to think that your spouse is a bad person, you may be under demonic attack. right? You may just be under demonic manipulation. Please take that log off your eyes. It's not helping. And I'm not saying that every bad thing that your spouse has been doing to you is justified. No, it's not justified. It's not good enough. And you probably don't deserve that. All right? So I'm not saying you deserve what you are getting. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? That's number one. So, how do you begin to do this? John Gottman also suggests what he calls attunement. 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 And there are keys he suggests. So, how do you attune? How do you turn towards your spouse in spite of all these negativities, all these conflicts, that you've had to deal with over the years? Number one, attune is an acronym. A for awareness. Know your partner's word. Know, God. Some of us have been married for years, but we don't know our spouse. We don't know who we are married to. And that alone is a disservice. You need to know your spouse. So be aware. Family life practitioners will say three reasons why marriages die. Reasons why marriages die. Number one, lack of awareness of self. Number two, lack of awareness of who you are married to. Number three, lack of awareness of the marriage institution. Those three things are one of the common reasons why marriages end in divorce. Okay? Lack of awareness of self, you don't know yourself. You are 30, but you don't know yourself. You are 35, but you don't understand yourself. What does it mean to know yourself? Understand your strengths, understand your weaknesses, understand your triggers, understand your trauma, understand where you're coming from, how you were raised, and understand how that has played a role in your current likes and dislikes and your irritations. Understand that. Be self-aware. Understand that you're not perfect. Understand that you have weaknesses too. And understand that the fact that you have weaknesses does not mean you're a bad person. But if you do not consciously take steps to be better, you might just end up being not so good. So self-awareness. Then spouse awareness. Understand who you are married to. These are the things that will not fly with my spouse. I remember those days I used to, sometimes I would just send a message to my wife joking and I would say, Ma, how are you, Ma? Or thank you, Ma. My wife didn't like it. She doesn't like it. Meanwhile, I remember the times I did it in the past. It was just a joke. But it took me a while to understand that will not sound like a joke to her. She doesn't like me using Ma. Whether as a joke or no joke, it just won't fly. Why would you be calling me Ma? Right? It took me a while to understand that. But I had to be conscious enough to understand that I can joke with other people and say, how are you, Ma? Even when the person is far younger than I am. How are you, Ma? Sorry, Ma. Well done, Ma. How is your day going, Ma? But I can't do that with my wife because that's not one of the things that she considers a joke. That's awareness. This won't fly. But with me and you, I could joke saying Ma to you. It might not mean much. It might not be a big deal. So some of you have not studied your spouse enough to understand what works and what does not work. And that is what is working against you. So John Gottman, steps to having a better outlook, awareness. Be aware. Be aware of yourself. Be aware of the kind of person you are married to. That will help you. All right? Next thing, turn towards. What does that mean? Positive response to the bid for connection that your spouse brings. So maybe you just had a conflict, you just had a heated argument or whatever, and then your spouse comes to ask you, what are you going to eat? Instead of you being too angry, like, well, we just had an argument 5 minutes ago. Take that as a bid from your spouse to connect. Just like Kingsley Okonkwo will always say, the way guys apologize is not the same way women expect apology. So two guys can fight right now, have a bad argument, blah, 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 and then the next 5 minutes, one of the guys could tell the other guy, did you see the match between Nigeria and Ivory Coast? In his own opinion, that is a form of apology. That's how guys, make up. Yeah, we quarreled yesterday, but today I'm asking you about the match. It is my way of seeking connection without necessarily saying, guy, I know I messed up yesterday. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those words to you. I shouldn't have, blah, 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 blah. But that's me making up. Yeah. That's me making up, right? Good. So sometimes you had an argument or you had a fight or something, you're not happy about something, and your spouse comes around and says, Would you like a drink? Accept it as a bid for connection. So John Gottman is saying, if you keep rejecting your spouse's bid for connection just because you are still angry, or you are still blaming your spouse for what he or she did or did not do last week or yesterday, if you keep avoiding those bid for connection, you are drowning your marriage. You are drowning your marriage. Can you guys still hear me? Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great, great. You are drowning your marriage. So I'm telling you how to work above conflicts now. That's what I'm teaching you. Number one, awareness. Be aware of yourself. Be aware of your trauma. Be aware of your triggers. Be aware of your weaknesses. Be aware. If you talk too much, you should be aware that I know that one of my weak points is that I talk too much. Be aware. Why do you need your spouse to be telling you that after he has told you before or she has told you before? You should already know that. I know one of my strong weak points is that I just, I go overboard. I can talk and talk and talk. And it's sometimes a problem. Okay, good. So be aware. Number two is turn towards. So accept your partner or your spouse's bid for connection and accept it, appreciate it. So your spouse says good morning. You had a fight last night before you went to bed. And your spouse says good morning. That's a bid for connection. Say good morning back. Maybe you're still not happy. It's fine. But accept the good morning. Not throw your face and like good morning for what's good about the morning. No, that's childish. Take the good morning. Do you know, I realized that maturity is you not being too happy, but still being able to be nice when you're not happy. It's maturity. So you are immature if when you are unhappy, everybody must know that you're unhappy. You're childish. When you're angry, everybody must know that you're angry. You're childish. So you must be able to manage your emotions such that you can maintain balance even when you are provoked. We are not saying you're not provoked. And sometimes the reason for your anger is valid. You have a right to be angry. Please note that you have a right to be angry when you're angry. You have a right. But how you express that anger is the difference between maturity and immaturity. So I'm not blaming you for getting angry. I'm not blaming you because you are provoked. I'm not blaming you because you're not happy about something. No, I can't blame you for that. But what I blame you for is what you do in spite of the fact that you're not happy or in spite of the fact that you're angry. That's what I blame you for. Psychology tells us that you cannot be angry and happy at the same time. So if you really want to be happy, you need to check your anger because both of them are not friends. They don't happen together. So for every second you spend in anger, you have denied yourself a second of happiness. For every second you spend in anger, you have denied yourself a second of happiness. Right? So awareness, turn towards your spouse, take every bit of connection. Number three, tolerance. What does that mean? Recognize and respect your partner's perspective, even when you do not agree with their opinion. That's tolerance. So both of you, you need to decide on the school your child will go to. You need to decide on what to invest in. You need to decide on what you will take for dinner. You need to decide where you want to go spend the summer. And then your spouse is not agreeing with your opinion, and you are not happy because you have clear facts for the reasons why you are proposing what you are proposing, and your spouse is not seem to see. It does not seem to see or agree. You need to be able to still respect your spouse's opinion even when you do not agree with your spouse's opinion, right? That is tolerance, and that's also maturity. Next point, understand. What does this mean? Seek first to understand your spouse before you even attempt to express your thoughts or feelings. Look, if you want to do well in your relationships, understanding the other person is what should be paramount to you than you saying your point. Some people have sold their peace in the name of selling a point. And a lot of times, your relationship, you will need to make a decision between your point and your peace. Your point and your peace. You will need to make a decision between your point and your peace. Every time when your point weighs more than your peace, know that the devil is selling you a bad deal. At no point in your marriage should the point you want to make be more important than the peace you need to promote. All right? So seek first to understand. The laws of the seven laws of what do they call it? Seven laws of leadership or the seven laws of high achievers or something. One of it is seek first to understand than to be understood. So it is paramount for mature people to be willing to understand the other person first before you express your thoughts. All right? That's very important. And then the other part is be non-defensive. Just listen. How can you be non-defensive? Be willing to listen, right? The Bible says that we should listen more than we talk. The book of James. They said we should be more interested in listening than in to talk. Foolish people talk more than they listen. Wise people listen more than they talk. I'll say that again. Foolish people talk more than they listen. Wise people listen more than they talk. So if you have doubled the capacity of your mouth against the capacity of your ear, you are foolish, right? Then the last point on that note is empathy. Empathy, validation and tenderness. Validation, tenderness, and kindness for your spouse's feelings. Look, this works like juju, it works like jazz, right? I have seen a number of studies and videos that buttresses this point. That sometimes conflicts linger because nobody is validating anybody. So if you want to lessen the conflict in your relationship, if your spouse is angry about something, or your spouse expresses a negative feeling over something, even when you don't understand it, acknowledge the emotion, validate the emotion. Validation helps. Validation, it will go a long way. Oh, so sorry you feel that way. I'm not happy because blah, 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 blah. Oh, so sorry. I mean, you don't agree. In fact, what your spouse may be expressing may be childish to you, but you don't tell your spouse that's childish. You validate the emotion, validate the feeling, even when you don't understand why they are throwing tantrums for that reason. You don't understand it. Is it because of this? That's why you are behaving like this. Don't say that. Though. I'm not asking you to say that, but validate the feeling. People feel better when they feel validated. And when people feel validated, they are more willing to engage. They are more willing to deal. What you want is for your spouse to deal. And in order to get that, validate his or her feelings. So that's from John Gottman, right? Solutions to all this conflict and this drama. Solutions. That's what we are discussing. So those are points from John Gottman. Let me move on to Sadia Khan. Sadia Khan. So what did Sadia Khan say? Look, you can Google these people, follow them, and understand their perspective. You don't have to believe me. So what did Sadia Khan say? Sadia, Sadia Khan, 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 Sadia Khan. Sadia Khan said, become a high value individual. Who is a high value individual? Now I want you to guess. Who would you consider to be a high valued individual? Nine. Okay, good. Who is a high valued individual by your own estimation or impression? Before we listen to what Sadia Khan says. Anybody? High valued individual. Anyone? Anyone. High valued individual.
Would that be someone that knows their self-worth?
Hmm. Hmm.
That
Someone
you find
who.
happiness in yourself first
Hmm.
before you can bring that to the table.
Hmm. That sounds really good, Someone who understands his or her self worth. That's very close to what I'm about to read. Very, very close. Very, very close to what I'm about to read. Because you need to understand your self worth to do or practice what I'm about to read. So I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. So Sadia Khan said, you become a high valued individual by delaying gratification. And in order to delay gratification, you must understand who you are, understand your self worth, right? So don't sell yourself for cheap because of a current argument, because of a current this this current disagreement, because of a current situation, right? Because this situation will pass and you will remain. This situation will pass and you will remain, right? So I like the point of you understanding yourself. Understand that hmm, psychology studies in psychology says that the implication of rejection on the brain is exactly equal or the same with the impact of a physical injury on the brain. Do you understand that? It means that imagine somebody had an accident and they had to cut off an arm. That's a very serious thing, right? That can be very painful. Now, the impact of that experience on that person's brain is exactly the same impact on your brain anytime you feel rejected. What do I mean? You are trying to sell a product to somebody and the person says, no, I don't need that product. That's rejection, right? Or you ask somebody else, if you are single, you ask somebody else and the person says, oh no, sorry, no, it can't work. Or sorry, I don't see you that way. I just see us as friends. You're not the kind of person I would like to get married to, but we are best as friends. The person turns you down. How you feel when somebody says that? Or when somebody takes somebody else's opinion or idea over yours, how you feel when you get that rejection, right? The impact of that feeling on your brain is the same thing you will feel if you had a physical injury. That's why it's very hard for so many people to handle rejection. But part of growth is you developing capacity to handle rejection better. For you to understand that when somebody says no to my idea, it does not mean no to me as a person. So don't take it personal. Look, what the devil will always want you to do is to take things personal. When your spouse says, I'm angry, you take it personal. When your spouse is not happy about something, you take it personal. When your spouse says your food is not sweet, your stew is not sweet, I don't like your cooking, you take it personal. Every time you take something personal, you're not likely to behave rational. I'll say that again. Every time you take something personal, you're not likely to respond or behave rationally. All right. So don't take things personal. Right. So Sadia Khan said, become a high valued person by delaying gratification. You want to snap, but count 1 to 10. You want to give your spouse a piece of your mind, count 1 to 10. Don't be quick to lash out. You are not portraying yourself as a high valued person every time you act based on emotions or sentiments. You are not expressing yourself or showing yourself to be a high valued person. A high valued person would delay gratification. All right? Develop self control. Do you know what the Bible says in the book of Proverbs about somebody who does not have self control? He said, anyone who lacks self control is like a wall, a house without defense. No gate, no door. Everything is wide open. Criminals can enter, rapists can enter, demons can enter. Everybody with wrong motives can enter because there is no security. So, anyone that does not have self control is synonymous to a building without defense. All right. So, delay gratification by developing self control. Remember, self control is a fruit of the Spirit and it's a trait of high valued person. Practice patience. Sometimes practice silence. You are very angry. It's not the time to say everything in your head. I just need to speak my mind. That's childish. I've said this a lot at different trainings. Yeah? If you always feel the need to say your mind every time without taking cognizance of how the other person might feel, you are not a high valued person. You are a cheap person. All right? If you don't have self-control, you are weak. In fact, that's what Sadia Khan said. She's not I don't know if she's a Christian, but when she was speaking, she wasn't speaking from a Christian point of view. She was speaking from psychology point of view, right? So you're not a high valued person when you cannot exercise restraint, self-restraint and self-control. Okay? And then finally she encouraged, think long term. There will be life after this conflict. There will be life after this argument. There will be life after this disagreement. So why do I want to ruin everything because of this disagreement? Think long term. Think long term, right? That's Sadia Khan, right? She also added, constantly check your expectations because expectations are resentments in the making. Constantly check your expectations because expectations are resentment in the making. Constantly check your expectations because expectations are resentment in the making. All right. And then number 3, she said, if you continuously pursue happiness, you'll be miserable a lot of the time. Instead, pursue growth, pursue depth, and happiness will be a consequence. All right. That's what she suggests because the more unhappy you are, the more you are likely to pick quarrels with your spouse. The more unhappy you are, the more you are likely to Keep, pick quarrels with your spouse. Oh my God. Mm. So that's all from Sadia Khan. Let's move on. Esther Perel. Esther Perel said, check your expectations. Identify your expectations. And then diversify your expectations. What does it mean to diversify your expectations? Always understand your spouse, that your spouse will not meet all your needs. So if you have been married for at least 6 months to 1 year, you should already know those areas of your needs that your spouse can meet by experience. And that those areas that your spouse cannot meet, are there things that you can meet through someone else? For example, you want your spouse to always advise you in terms of the business you are involved in. But having been married to this your spouse for 6 months to 1 year, you realize that your spouse has not been able to give you quality advice in that area, or your spouse is not forthcoming in that area. Maybe because your line of business is not an area where he or she is conversant with, or maybe your line of business is not that area where your spouse is interested in. Even though I will encourage that your spouse should develop interest in that area, but I'm not your spouse. But you can see that your spouse is not really throwing much interest in the area of your business. What does that tell you? It means that as far as your business is concerned, don't look up to your spouse. Stop looking up to your spouse. Stop expecting counsel from your spouse. Stop expecting all of that support from your spouse. Stop it. So as far as your business is concerned, look for a mentor that can guide you, that can advise you, that can support you, that can help you, that can give you the professional expertise or support that you need, not your spouse. So you see, what Esther Perel is saying is identify your expectations, diversify your expectations, because perhaps you are having certain expectations of your spouse that your spouse cannot meet, or that your spouse is not interested in meeting. All right. So are those areas things that you can meet from somebody else? Remember, it's not all the expectations you can meet from somebody else. If it's sexual expectations, am I saying that you should go and meet your neighbor to fulfill that expectation? Am I saying you should go and meet your mentor? Am I saying you should go and meet your pastor? So it also depends on the nature of those areas. But if there are areas like business, like career, and your spouse is not forthcoming, please look up to somebody else for that. So identify your expectations, check your expectations, diversify your expectations, embrace change. Esther Perel is encouraging that you embrace change, and then take responsibility. Take responsibility for repair. So every time you have conflicts with your spouse, take responsibility for repair. How do you take responsibility for repair? Maybe you raised your voice. Take responsibility for that. I know I raised my voice. I'm sorry about that. That's taking responsibility. Rather than saying, if he didn't say that, I would not have raised my voice. If she didn't say that, I would not have raised my voice. It's her fault. That's an abuser. An abuser will always justify his or her misbehavior and pin it on the other person. That's an abuser. You're an abuser if you do that. So the point is you raise your voice. Take responsibility. Stop saying it's because she cannot hear word. That's why I raised my voice. That's abusive. That's manipulative. That's wrong. All right? Good. So that is Esther Perel, right? Mark Twain. Now let's learn from Mark Twain. I will read this to you. Very interesting. Mark Twain said, if you collect 100 black ants, 100 black ants, what time is it? Okay, good. 100 black ants and 100 fire ants. Fire ants are red. So you collect 100 black ants and 100 fire ants, and you put them in a jar. He says nothing will happen. That's Mark Twain. Nothing will happen. But if you take that jar and shake it violently, you shake it violently, he said, and after shaking it violently, you leave the jar on the table, right? He said, the ants will start killing each other. Black ants will start attacking the red ants. The red ants will start attacking the black ants. Do you understand? He now said, the red ants believe the black is the enemy, while the black believes the red is the enemy. When the real enemy is no. So this is a quiz now. So you put 100 black ants in a jar, and in the same jar you put 100 fire ants in the jar. And if you put it on a table, nothing will happen. But if you take that jar and shake it violently, shake it, and put it back on the table, he said the black ants will begin to see the red ants as the enemy, and the red ones will begin to see the black ones as the enemy, and they begin to kill each other. So the question is, who is the enemy? And I need an answer. Who is the enemy? Who is the enemy? Is it the black ants or the red ants? Question. Who is the enemy? Who is the enemy? Anyone saying anything? No opinion? Who is the enemy?
The person that shook the jar.
Exactly, bro. The person that shook the jar is the enemy. So that's what happens in marriage too. There's conflict. Husband is not happy with wife. Wife is not happy with husband. Husband believes my wife is my problem. Wife believes my husband is my problem. But the real enemy is not in that marriage. It's outside the marriage. Right? So Mark Twain is suggesting that every time you have a heated argument or you have a serious conflict in your relationship, sit down and be an observer in that scenario and understand that neither of you is the enemy. That's what Mark Twain says. Neither of you is the enemy. So the black ant, husband, is not the enemy. The fire ant, wife, is not the enemy. The enemy is the person who shook the jar. So the question is, who is shaking my marriage jar? Who is shaking my marriage? Who is the person that wants me and my wife to fight? Who is the person that wants I and my husband to fight? Who is the person causing these numerous fights? We fought on Monday, it's just Wednesday we are fighting again. It's not fun. It's not fun. Right? So sometimes it's your past causing the fight. Sometimes it's your emotions because you're not able to put your emotions in perspective causing the fight. Sometimes it's the devil just throwing things. And he sits back to see how you play. Right. So that's Mark Twain. So I will wrap up with this from John Maxwell. So these are John Maxwell's thoughts on conflict. 10 points. I'll run over it quickly, then we take questions. So John Maxwell says, the success of your marriage and your life is determined by your ability to work together. So your marriage is not failing because you married the wrong person. No. If you have always believed that you married the wrong person, please debunk that thought because that's not necessarily true. I know you have issues. It's not been going well in the past 10 years, but that's not a proof, a valid proof that you married the wrong person. So you can marry the right person. Let me tell you something God told me. God said to me, he said, if I come in human form and give you a spouse that I created from the foundation of the earth for you, and I officiate your wedding ceremony, and the pastor who weds you together, who says, I now pronounce your husband and wife. It was God that officiated your wedding. It's not a guarantee that your marriage will succeed. So God bringing both of you together is not a guarantee that your marriage will succeed. How about that? So the devil wants you to believe that you married the wrong person. Yeah, I've been in a place before where I thought my wife was the wrong person. So the devil will always want to prove to you beyond all reasonable doubt that you married the wrong person. Don't swallow that lie. Okay, so John Maxwell said the success of your marriage is highly dependent on how you work together, how you live together, not by your spouse becoming like you, not by my wife becoming like me, or by me becoming like my wife. That's not the idea of marriage. The idea of marriage is not to make spouses the same thing. No. Okay? So, what are the 10 things that John Maxwell suggests in terms of conflicts? Right? Number 1, obey the 101% principle. What does that mean? Now, listen to me. I will not repeat it twice because of time. This is 9:42, right? So, let me speed this up. I won't repeat myself. Listen attentively. If you are making notes, make it as simple as possible. You can go back to them. Right.